Why is there no outrage on rapes when they take place in small towns? In fact, crimes against women. How does one then curb crimes against women? Are tougher laws like capital punishment really the need of the hour, and will that resolve anything? What will it take to change mindsets? Is it time for society to look at every case wherever it happens and raise their voice at whatever level? Joining me now are Priyanka Chaturvedi, Shiv Sena UBT MP. Talish Ray is an advocate. Poonam Kathuria is head Society for Women's Action and Training Initiatives. Trisha Shetty is founder She Says, works for gender equality and human rights advocacy. And Colin Gonsalves is lawyer, Supreme Court. He's just back from Chhattisgarh, where he's been looking at cases of sexual assault against tribal women there. Let's come to each of our panelists. I want to start with you, Priyanka Chaturvedi, because as a politician, you've seen what's been playing out, whether it's in Badlapur in Maharashtra where you are, or whether it's in Kolkata. Badlapur is close to Mumbai, so there's been a lot of attention. What happens when there is, as we've just seen, a tragic case in Ratnagiri, or indeed in Ambedkar Nagar, or a small town of this country? Why is it that whether politicians or civil society, the focus seems to be on crimes against women when they take place in big cities only?
Let me also tell you, Rajdeep, if people of Badlapur hadn't stepped out and outraged over what the school did and how the FIR was delayed in filing the FIR and the police was not cooperating, we wouldn't have even spoken about Badlapur. Media wouldn't have even focused on it. So there are two things at play here. And while we talk about Badlapur and Ratnagiri, let's not forget the 6 girls from Akola school, 14-year-old girls who were preyed upon by their professor. So these are issues that are happening on a daily basis. You've also given a count. We just end up putting a number behind every single rape case that comes. We outrage over some. We feel absolutely helpless over some. We ask for severe action against some. I think it's time for collectively, not just outraging, expecting accountability. A is prevention. Obviously, we move towards societies which prevent such crimes, which discourage such crimes. How do you discourage crimes? You discourage crimes by ensuring there's gender parity, by ensuring public spaces are accessible to women, to have more women in economic workspaces, to have more women in the labor force. That's part one. The part two, about punishment as well as prosecution. We have to be committed to a trial which ends in a particular, while we have fast track courts, we're talking about the fast track courts, but even Nirbhaya's parents, it took them a fight of 7 years to get justice for her. So how do we ensure that the prosecution happens in a time-bound manner? How do we ensure the prosecution is foolproof? Those are things we will need to reflect upon, and collective outrage can keep happening every day over some unfortunate crime happening across the country. And I can say this with assurance that no woman in India would have not faced some kind of harassment in their lives, in any part of their lives, whether as a young girl or as women of today, they are facing this. So it is time to educate our society, to empower our women, to have them in public spaces. So those are things. I'm not going into the politics. No, politics keeps happening, and we keep discussing this.
No, I take your wider point, but I just for a moment want to, as you said, in Badlapur, because people raised their voice, locals raised their voice, the media then reflected it, and there was some attempt made at least to ensure that the case will hopefully lead to its logical conclusion. But Colin Gonsalves, you're just back from Chhattisgarh, where you're looking at sexual assault against tribals. Now, those cases don't get reported in the mainstream media. Do you believe that some parts of the country, simply because of their, I call it the tyranny of distance, because they are distant from the big cities, those crimes do not get the kind of attention they deserve? You need politicians to raise their voice. You need the public to raise their voice if there is to be justice.
You're right, Razi, but that's the half of the truth. Our country and our institutions have become so docile, so quiet, so uncaring, that the women have nowhere to go. I took the testimony of 60 tribal people, 30 of whom were women. And they talked about the killing of 170 tribals in this year itself, 2024. And many of the cases was rape and murder of tribal women. Now, not very far from where the killings happened, you have the High Court of Chhattisgarh, which is fast asleep, not bothered. In Manipur, hardly kilometers away from the High Court in Imphal, the High Court also is fast asleep. So women, you're not right, Rajiv, when you say outrage is not there. Even the slightest incident of rape, the women are outraged. Their blood is boiling. They want to do something. They go to the police. Police don't help. They go to the courts don't help. The institutions of governance have completely disintegrated.
No, you're saying
The answer lies.
the High Court in Chhattisgarh or the High Court in in Manipur did not respond quickly enough. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, totally. So many Kuki women were raped. What did the High Court in Imphal do? Or the High Court in Chhattisgarh fast asleep? And I'm not using these words lightly because I do know that Chhattisgarh High Court did not bother at all. When it comes in the papers that 100 tribals plus have been killed in police actions saying that they were Naxalites, and we recorded that testimony, they were unarmed villagers who were killed. It's amazing that the institutions have become dead, almost totally dead.
So you're saying it's not just about small towns versus big cities, it's about institutions failing in their responsibility in parts of the state. I'll come back to you, Colin. Talish Ray, as a young advocate, do you agree with what Colin Gonzalez says, that actually it's an institutional failure? It's not as if women aren't protesting whenever there is a sexual assault in any part of the country. Maybe the mainstream media doesn't reflect it, but the anger is there. Institutions don't respond.
So I think I'd like to nuance it slightly further from my learned senior at the bar. When we look at violence against women, and I'm not just talking about sexual violence, I'm talking about all manners of violence, you have to actually give a focus that the WHO put it around as an epidemic in India, but more importantly, a public health issue as well. But when we look at the redressal mechanism, we also have to see the institutional structure where we fall back on a criminal justice system rather than having any sort of, and I've been looking for it forever, while you have stakeholders such as not-for-profits as well as concerned members of society that have put out, but there is no national document that exists as on today as a policy level in order to tackle violence against women, which has been declared as something of an emergency. And in that, we have to keep in mind that 63 to 65% of population does not stay in urban centers. In fact, the figures are far larger. So when you look at the institutional apathy, because when we are talking about rural women specifically, I must also point out that if you've had butter this morning, that's courtesy of movements that started in rural Gujarat. If you have read anything in the 1990s about the anti-Arak movement, these were women from rural areas that took charge when institutional support was provided. For example, the anti-Arak movement that is started with, there was a trend that moved in towards literacy, and from there a small district where the district collector and the sarpanch helped the women while they were protesting, and then they moved against a coalition that had been built in by those that were vending liquor, and they were able to talk about their problem. They thought that the liquor was contributing directly, which it was, to violence, which was not just financial but also physical. So what we're talking about is that there is at a macro level, there is no one specific policy. If you look at all the websites, they talk about various abhiyans that are there, that are run by various governments, which focus on health and sometimes deal with the violence of women, but violence against women. But when you look for a policy which would address, acknowledge that this is an issue. This is not just violence. It basically should be called, this is a country where we are at war against our own women. You can take any place, any area, as Priyanka earlier pointed out, that every woman has been through some form of violence or the other, inconsequential of whether in an urban area, non-urban area, privileged, non-privileged, we all go through that. And therefore, I think it's important for us to also focus that what are the institutions that have stood by women traditionally. And as much I agree with the senior advocate in terms of the fact that the courts have traditionally taken a lead, but you can't only be looking at criminal justice redressal mechanism. That comes in at the redressal stage. There's also the prevention stage. There is also the stage at which you're going to talk about it.
Yeah, but the fact is that we don't talk enough, perhaps. And, the good thing about the Kolkata in a strange way is that it's forced people to talk about it. You know, Kolkata actually has one of the best records when it comes to crime against women across our cities. But it needed an incident like this, tragic as it is, for people to wake up to the reality. No city is free. Poonam Kathuria, is your sense, therefore, that perhaps we saw it with Nirbhaya about 12 years ago here in Delhi? It suddenly woke up people to what could happen to someone in Delhi. In Kolkata, middle class girl, therefore suddenly the middle class anger spills out. Would it spill out when it happens in an Ambedkar Nagar? Would it spill out when it happens in rural Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand?
So, Rajiv, I think the question is little more complex than that. I think we have to move away from this whole notion of criminal justice system as the answer to the issue. I think we have to look at a governance response, which means, it changes in attitude, changes in norms, and we want safety. And I'm very clear, we don't need protection. We do not want sensitization. That's very patronizing. We want rights. Women want the right to, justice, right to safety, right to move freely. And
but does a woman in rural India have ma'am, the point is, does a woman in rural India have those same rights? At least does that woman in rural India have those rights?
So for that, we need to understand the logic of, like, the sense of injustice and what leads to a protest. And if you look at it's been, let's say, look at last 50 years. 1972, the Mathura rape case happened and the country rises up. Mm-hmm. And then you have 1992, the Bhavri case, and you have some protests. And 2012, the Nirbhaya. I think Mathura rape case, people were outraged because they felt, how could these service providers, these people who were supposed to be protectors, suddenly could do something like this? This was the first time that it came in. Bhavri Devi did not get so much traction, but she had the backing of a movement. Nirbhaya, of course, the country could relate to it. And it was, and I think, if you look at the anatomy of a protest, it is when people across caste, class, gender come together and protest. Somewhere everyone is feeling this could happen to me and it could happen to anybody close to me. And that is where I think the proximity to the national capital, middle class girl, educated, was a very important factor. The presence of media can make or break a news. So I think that was a very important element there. So I think we need to understand, and then of course you have this whole idea. Now, nothing of that exists in a rural area. You have caste, you have class. I think what happens also is that protests have a power equation and between the survivor, the protesters, and the protectors. Now, so who is the survivor? A survivor, do they have a family backing? Mm-hmm. Bhavri, for example, if she came from a Dalit background, how many Dalit women find justice? How many Dalit women's cases, migrant women's cases find traction? But because, again, this case, this girl again came from a middle-class family in Kolkata, was a professional, has a professional organizational backing, and also I think a certain amount of where it happens. Does it happen? The place where it happens. If it happens in Delhi, if it happens in the ruling government's state, it happens in another state. So I'm saying somewhere our society has to question itself on what does it respond to and what does it not respond to. We have had worse cases than this. And I think, ADR's report, I think we are aware of, where 358 MPs and MLAs have rape cases against it, and the political class has accepted them as their own.
That's an important point which I'll bring to Priyanka Chaturvedi in a moment. But Trisha Shetty, just let's look at what was just said, that Kolkata, middle class, professional woman with dreams in her eyes, go a healer, a doctor in a government hospital. Is that the reason why this has struck a chord across India's cities? Much like Nirbhaya, again a young woman, aspirational young woman who's hoping with stars. Is that the reason why these cases get traction in a way that perhaps cases that might happen again outside the big city don't? And what does that say about us?
Undoubtedly. We live in a country of great paradoxes, right? We have President Draupadi Murmu, which was a great moment for India to reckon with its complicated history of caste-based politics. And in contrast, if you just look at statistics and numbers, in India, as of the last report that we have of the NCRB, we reported 4,45,256 cases of crimes against women. Out of this, 5 states make up for 50% of the cases. And I'm going by the order of the cases, right? That's Uttar Pradesh at the very top, followed by Maharashtra, followed by Rajasthan, followed by West Bengal, followed by Madhya Pradesh. Now, when you talk about crimes against Dalit women, 10 Dalit women every day are subject to rape according to NCRB data. I repeat, 10 Dalit women are subject to rape every single day. There's a really good report that was come out by Equality Now and Sabiman Society that studied Haryana. And they specifically speak about how the India justice system has failed survivors of caste-based sexual violence. And they've given specific anecdotes. Why? Because when they studied cases that specifically women who are Dalit women and girls go through, they are subject to 62.5% of gang rapes. Rajdeep, 62.5% of gang rapes in comparison to 11 to 12% of gang rapes that women from other communities and castes are subject to. So what we see is people who belong to the Dalit community, their bodies are subject to a lot more grotesque violence and crime. Why? Because the perpetrators from the highest caste believe that they can get away with it, right? If you go back to what the survivors, victims' brother in Hathras said, he said the verdict is according to our caste. That is a slap against all of our faces, right? That this is what the litmus test of Indian society is currently. Look at, going back to this report, 42% of rape cases, the police have dropped investigation and refused to file charges when it comes to handling cases of Dalit women who've been subject to rape, in comparison to the national average of, again, 15% where the police have dropped charges. So time and again, what you see in India is impunity, protection of rapists from the highest of offices when they are committing crimes, as you rightfully pointed out, of women who belong to rural communities, of women who belong to Dalit communities, OBC backgrounds, tribal communities, religious minority communities, and also then the justice system failing them. And the only time we talk about it is when there's public outrage. We must just quickly, I'm just want to say, I'm really heartened by what Priyanka Chaturvedi has said because she's remained politically agnostic. I'm really heartened by the debate that which you have held on all the panelists. We must point the tail of the donkey, which is political impunity, right? How political powers that be very often fail the women in our country, which is what Colin Gonsalves is saying as well. Let
me take that, Trisha, to Priyanka Chaturvedi. Priyanka Chaturvedi, the ADR report suggests about 158 out of our MPs, MLAs are allegedly involved in crimes against women. They spread across states. The fact, therefore, is that if our MPs themselves are people allegedly involved in crimes against women, what's the message that goes down the line? Surely somewhere there must be some kind of zero tolerance to those who are seen to be guilty, or if not guilty, alleged to be, even if they are accused of. If there is a prima facie case made out against them, they should be rooted out of public life. But they still continue in some form in public life.
I am totally in agreement, and I'm ashamed to know the numbers as far as they representing these people who have charges against them, have been given tickets, have been voted into the positions of power that they are in, and continue to represent their constituencies in the parliament.
But do they have a sense
no
of impunity? Do they feel a sense of impunity that they can get away with it?
Yes, Rajdeep, allow me to complete.
Please go ahead.
What Trisha was saying, I quite agree with what Trisha and Talish both are saying. Rape in India has become an instrument of wielding power. Whether it is caste intersectionality, whether it is economics intersectionality, whether it is the intersectionality of them coming and representing them in the parliament, they come on the basis of the vote that the constituency is giving them. Let's also understand that there are two parts to it. One is a ticket is being given to them. Yes, absolutely, the political party should be held accountable. The second part being that they are winning and coming to the parliament. Please understand the constituencies are voting for them despite knowing what are the charges against them, the heinous charges against them. So the point here is, when I keep talking about prevention and having more women in positions of power, which I think Trisha made, where Trisha said most of the levers of power are in the hands of the men. And that is where the problem lies. That is when the power reflex happens. Now, for example, the Bilkis Bano case. I'm talking about the Bilkis Bano case simply because it was in the media scrutiny. It was in the media limelight. And what happened to her? She fights her fight. She gets them convicted. And then after some years, with absolute impunity, those accused are let go. Unless there's another round of outrage which gets them behind the bars, thanks to the Supreme Court of India. So the point is, when we're talking about mechanisms coming into place, institutions coming into place, let power politics not play where the justice needs to be done. It should be the institutional mechanism that comes into play, which is absolutely off everyone's political spaces. I think that is only when we will be a more enlightened, empowered society.
So it's not about laws, it's not just about having tough laws.
To people who are in positions of power.
Yeah, it's not just about having tough laws, it's actually having lawmakers and institutions, more importantly, that will ensure through process, through policy, that those laws are followed up. Colin Gonsalves, the Supreme Court, for example, takes suo motu notice in this case of Kolkata. But there are so many cases across this country. Even in the Bilkis Bano, it required the Supreme Court to step in. The truth of the matter is that you could well argue that that hardly is going to resolve the issue. The Supreme Court or even the President of India may speak out may speak out after Kolkata, but there are dozens of other crimes being committed every day that don't result in either the Supreme Court or the President of India waking up.
Well, Rajdeep, I'll take a little issue with you. I don't think the Supreme Court has been effective in the least. And if you look at the Haryana wrestlers case, day 1 registered an FIR, day 2 case disposed of. And the wrestlers struggled, went from pillar to post, while the main culprit went roaming around the country, gloating about the fact that there's no action taken against him. In Nirbhaya's case, we did something right, but we did many things wrong. What we did right was the movement and the anger and the frustration and the coming out on the streets. But what we did wrong was to decide that, yes, we need a stronger law. So therefore, we need a committee. So therefore, a committee is formed. Justice Verma heads the committee. Brilliant judge. The first and fatal mistake that he made was to take the proceedings of that committee out of the streets where they were surrounded by people. They had reclaimed the streets, and he took them into a conference room. 1 year passes, report comes, brilliant report. Law is amended, brilliant amendments, and we are back to square one. What we need in India is the institutionalizing of non-violent direct action by men and women across the country, but led by women. So
no, but
these are not 1 month, 2 months.
You see, you can't sustain, it can't be 365 days, right? The institutional changes could have come after even the Nirbhaya fund, 30% of it is underutilized. The Mahila police is not in place. You see, the fact is that the recommendations may be fine. Who's going to implement them? Who's going to act on them? That's where state governments come in. Yeah. Law and order is a state subject. In this case, the Bengal government is responsible. In the case of Badlapur, the Maharashtra government is responsible. So the state governments also have to walk the talk, and they don't. Poonam Kathuria, citizens watching this program will say, what can we do? We are angry, we are outraged, we are ready to come on the street, peacefully protest. But beyond that, what's going to change?
I think, Rajdeep, we need to change ourselves. I think I'm questioning myself. I'm questioning I want to ask you a question. Why is media not paying enough attention to rapes happening in small towns? I mean, you're asking the political class, you're asking the society, but there is media there, and like I said, media. No,
I put it, ma'am, on the. I get trolled for this. I call it the tyranny of distance. Imphal is way too far at times from what happens in, or Churachandpur is way too far from the national capital. Kolkata will have several reporters there. Mumbai will have several reporters. The fact is, if it happens in Manipur, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, it's just the tyranny of distance. I know that's no excuse. I'm just trying to explain why.
So I think at this point in time, I really see very little hope. If you look at how many women actually are there in the parliament or in power because of male backing, how many of them are related to have either husbands or brothers or sisters or fathers over there? So I think the whole thing about the masculinity, the nexus of male power and the patriarchy, unless women could break that, I don't have any hope in the men of this country, frankly.
You don't have any hope in the men of this country. That's, extremely disappointing. But Talish Ray, are you more hopeful in the men of this country that they would actually wake up?
Well, some men do, but not all.
I'm always hopeful because I'm always hopeful because I don't believe that it has to do with gender spectrum identity. I believe that you can be born a woman, but you could be extremely patriarchal, and you can choose to identify with the gender of a man and be a thorough feminist, because essentially it's an ideology. What is feminism or what is patriarchy? They are both ideologies. One which believes that all genders across spectrum should be equal, and another which believes that the gender which identifies itself as male has every right to go ahead with impunity, whatever they would choose to do. And therefore, I always have hope. Like I said, there time and again, women in this country have resurrected and demanded what has been their due. We have some very strong women. We've always given an example, and where there is hope, there is always light that is there. So I would say that if you're asking for a solution, I would say in terms of a solution, it's just holding accountable every single minute, every single day, question every act, question every patriarchy. And maybe one day then you'll come to a solution. We will, comparatively come to a solution.
Okay, so you're
Let's not forget, Rajdeep, 20 years back, nobody on TV was discussing this.
Yeah, you see, that's the one change, Trisha Sethi. At least we are discussing it. The fact is, that's why some believe the politics of rape is important. We can say it's, Kolkata has got politicized, but because it's got politicized, at least we are talking about it.
Oh, I 100% agree. Look, everything is political. The fact that people are getting away with committing crimes against women is because there's political patronage that's protecting them, right? So thank you for discussing this issue. But I'll tell you where you've discussed it in a way that's actually hygienic, that's actually serving the cause as opposed to sabotaging it. Because you've not had talking heads from different political parties come and do political mudsliding. So kudos to you for actually having a conversation with panelists who shared important perspective and points of view that's going to help the cause as opposed to just engage in political BS. Excuse my French here. Also, the second thing that I think the media can do is, instead of calling a Priyanka Chaturvedi, which is what often we see, right? Anytime when it's crimes against women, we call political representatives who are women and ask them to be held accountable for the bad behavior of men, which I think really needs to stop. What we should be doing is holding the perpetrators accountable. What we should be doing is holding the political parties that are protecting the rapists, the sexual abusers, the accusers of crime within their party accountable to say, Bhai Sahab, why are you giving tickets? I'm sorry, but on what basis are you giving tickets? On what basis of their resume that it's so sparkling to you that you're giving them tickets instead of making the women apologize for the bad behavior of men? Another thing, I think we should follow the money. It's our taxpayer money. We have every right to follow the money. Ask where the funds are going. Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. Most of the funds are used for cosmetic reasons by the current administration. Where has the Nirbhaya fund gone? The reason I'm asking you this, Rajdeep, is because I work on ground. Let me tell you, fast-track courts are overburdened. Public prosecutors have no idea what cases they're handling. If you look at it from a survivor perspective, the survivors feel lost because the public prosecutor doesn't even know their name just before going and defending them in court. Not because out of malice out of the public prosecutor, but because they're overburdened. Forensic labs don't have infrastructure. How will evidence be provided to the court on time when forensic labs are overburdened and do not have the infrastructure to provide medical evidence on time? Right. This is what's happening in states like Maharashtra and Bombay with the best amount of resources available. Simple thing. Private hospitals refuse to treat rape survivors. The amount of, I have emails by private hospitals in Bombay that says, yeah, no, not interested. Even that goes against the law. So what can we do as people? Rake their feet to the fire. Every politician that stands in defense of rapists. When we talk about accountability, it does not mean suspension. It means immediately firing them, filing police cases against them for lacunae or not doing their job, because these are positions of people of positions in power and authority that are failing women, which is an aggravated offense.
Okay. Very, very interesting. I'll give Priyanka Chaturvedi the final word with a suggestion, Priyanka Chaturvedi. Why don't all the strong women MPs and MLAs across parties get together, form a coalition, and come up with the kind of policy changes that we need? I mean, somewhere down the line, Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao, can be a nice slogan, but you're going to have to walk the talk. Are MPs at least willing to cut across party lines? I haven't got MPs across party lines today because it ends in tu meh. But you all can sit in a room over the next few months and maybe come across with a policy that will ensure possibly safety for women.
Only to burst your bubble and say it is next to impossible for women who are in positions of power to rise above their politics and take a stance for the betterment of the women of the society. I hate to say it, but I'd rather be honest than be dishonest on your show. It is high time that all politicians, and also high time for India to understand, Parliament is a reflection of the society. Society is a reflection of communities. Communities are a reflection of what is happening in homes. When we start reforming the homes, and I'm not just dumping it on a mother to decide that her child has to be, her son has to be raised as a feminist. It is the joint responsibility of both the father and the mother to ensure that their son is learning the basics of how to behave amongst women, rather than women being taught how to safeguard themselves amongst men. So that is where it begins from. So change every time begins from home. I continue to say it. Parliament is mere reflection. Whether you're talking about the rapists who are accused, those you're talking about who have cases against them, etc., are all voted into power. They come by the votes of the people of this country. So we are all a reflection of each other, and it's time. We started looking into a mirror and saying that enough is enough, and we start change from here.
Okay.
What Draupadi Murmu ji said, it's great that she said what she did,
good news,
but the best
I've
would
run
be...
out of time, but there's good news, which is what exactly was said by many of you has been reflected by the Kerala film industry. What they've done through the Hema Committee report is name, shamed and expose those who are involved in these cases of sexual assault, however powerful they are. And that is perhaps the way. When the women are able to do what the Hema Committee did, and credit to the Kerala women who've done that, perhaps change will come. But I'm fascinated that all of you have given the kind of insights that you have. And yes, it's refreshing that we didn't have a political tutu meme. And we will
continue.
I get a
30 second?
Because this is an issue. Yes, ma'am, I can give you 30 seconds. Go ahead.
So very quickly, I'm just saying laws will not bring about social change. And unless men are willing to give up their patriarchal privileges and entitlements, I don't think things will shift.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I think I made a...
No, so maybe the Hema Committee report will do that. You see, that's why I want to turn to that story, because that story in a sense reflects the possible hope that we have. Thank you all very much for joining me.